Hello, everybody. The time is 10:19 on March 21st, 2021. Today I got my first dose of the COVID vaccine. I got the Pfizer brand, if you will. So on April 11th, I'll go back for my second dose. If you can, if it's at all possible where you are in the world, please get your vaccine. Remember to double mask up if it's possible. Fauci said so it's gotta be the best case scenario. Anyhow, hello to my first listener, listener, viewer. Hello, number one. Hi. This is gonna be the last portion of River of Teeth by Sarah Gailey. If you could poke your head into the description box of this stream/video, you'll see a link to this book via the publisher and the sequel. We have about 80 pages to get through, so we'll be here till about maybe 11:45. So strap in if you can. Oh, the viewer's already gone, but that's all right. This is a good freaking book. I highly encourage you to pick it up. Obviously, there's some pronunciations and words that I stumbled over with the past two parts, but this is a good freaking book. You can find Sarah Gailey on Twitter. Pronouns are they, them. I didn't know that previously, so I apologize for not being up to date on that when I could have been. I really enjoyed discussing with my book club, and I'm looking forward to more opportunities to lending my voice to bring these books to a new sort of perspective. Let's not waste any time. As soon as I finish here, I got dishes to do and Mario Kart to play. So let's enjoy ourselves. Let's read this. Enjoy this marvelous book. We are on page 97. Hero dropped their bag onto the floor of the presidential suite and took the room in. It was small, as far as presidential suites went, but it was, according to Mr. Travers, the largest on the Sturgis Queen. "Well," said Houndstooth, "seems cozy enough, this, if you like red velvet." He ran a hand over the seat of the plush divan that sat under the window. Hero closed their eyes and breathed deeply. Their lips parted just a little, and Houndstooth nearly died with the effort of not noticing it. "I do. Like red leather, that is." Houndstooth jumped. "What? You what?" Hero opened their eyes and considered Houndstooth, who was perched on the edge of the divan, stiff-backed, holding his hat in his lap. They cocked their head and smiled. "I do like red velvet." "I do too." The K-pop band. Well, I used to. Houndstooth moved to the window and twitched the curtain aside. "What do you make of Travers, then? I don't like that he made us check our guns. Standard security procedures, indeed. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And did you see the munitions he had stored down there? What, is he expecting a war to break out?" He cleared his throat, smoothed the front of his jacket. "I think," Hero drawled, crossing the room to join him, "that he's the least of our problems." Hero stared out the window. Houndstooth stared at Hero. "What's the worst of our problems?" Hero smiled, watching the water below them. "Well, Winslow, there's only one bed in here." They turned their head, still smiling, and took in Houndstooth's rich pink blush. "And last I counted, there's two of us." Houndstooth stammered incoherently as Hero chucked him under the chin, then strolled out of the room, easing the door shut behind them. With the latch clicked, Houndstooth collapsed onto the divan. He stared at the bed, willing the heat to dissipate from his cheeks. Archie and Adelia sat in the wood-paneled main lounge of the Sturgis Queen. Adelia's feet rested on a low, claw-footed stool. A glass of ice water sweated in her hand. "They sure know how to treat a pregnant girl, eh? She grinned over her glass at Archie, who sat in a wide wicker-backed armchair opposite her, turning the feral bull's tusk over and over in her hands. "Why are you worried?" Adelia asked. "The worst thing that happens is they try to kill us." Archie continued worrying at the tusk. She muttered something under her breath. ¿Qué? I said, Archie repeated deliberately, that I'm not sure it's them I'm worried about. What do you mean? I mean, they knew we would be getting to the gate today. They knew how many of us to expect. They had exactly 6 spots in the paddock, 1 for each hippo, and they had enough room set aside for 6 people, which means they knew about Neville. So, Archie said, her hands going still. I think that someone told them about us. I think that someone told them of what route we will be taking. I think. What's all this about? Hero said, striding into the lounge. Archie thinks that we have a spy in our midst, Adelia said with a crooked grin. Hero looked sharply at Archie. A spy? We? Archie replied, her brows high. I inspected the gate while Houndstooth was talking to the hillbilly ranger. It was sturdy, intact, no recent welding that I could see, and we all know that a hippo isn't going to reach higher remming speeds overland than in the water. What's your point, Archie? Hero asked, not unkindly. My point is, if the gate was not broken, then how exactly did a single feral bull escape the Harriet and find us? Just the one. Not enough for us to notice and change course. I'll tell you how. Monsieur Travers snaps his fingers, and that guard let it out. I'd guess that happened on the same day we hit the road. The only question is, who was gone long enough to send a telegram? Adelia, Archie, and Hero looked at each other. None of them wanted to be the first to speak. The doors to the lounge swung open, and Houndstooth strode in briskly. Well, why the long faces, you 3? And where's Calhoun? Adelia rattled the ice in her glass. I'd imagine he's at the blackjack tables, she said, plucking out an ice cube and pressing it to her neck. It's too hot. You're all right, Adelia. See, it's just... Nobody ever told me that having a little girl would make me so hot all the time. Houndstooth, being a gentleman, said nothing. He kept his eyes averted from Adelia's right belly. Hero, having no such compunctions, laughed heartily. Get used to it, ma'am. We have a saying where I'm from. Boys will make you cry, but girls will make you sweat. The lamps that lit the riverboat inside and out had come on by the time Archie found Cal on the casino floor. He swayed gently on his stool, and it was readily apparent that bourbon, rather than the rocking rhythm of the boat, was what moved him. Archie pulled up a stool beside him and mentally tallied the cash that rested in stacks on his side of the felt. How you doing there, mon ami? She asked softly. Cal swung his head around to her and grinned broadly. Blood was seeping through the bandage over his left ear. He had 2 toothpicks in his mouth. One was fresh, the other chewed nearly to splinters, as though he had forgotten to discard the old one. Archie, or should I say, Regina, he leered as he said her name, and she thought she could guess what pun he thought he was making. Actually, Sherry, it is Regina. Rhymes with Pasadena. Oh, I think he was trying to say Regina. Ew. Actually, it's Regina. Rhymes with Pasadena. His leer dissolved, and he became morose so quickly that Archie feared he would fall off his stool. You know Pasadena. We, Calhoun? That is where you met our Adelia on a supply trip for our Mr. Houndstooth, was it not? A decade ago. We? I don't want to talk about Adelia, Cal slurred. I miss Adelia so much, and I don't even want to talk about her. She won't even talk to me about the baby, Regina. After what I did for her, she came back to me and then she left, and I don't want to talk about her. No, thank you. Of course. Cal interrupted Archie before she could finish agreeing not to talk about Adelia. I met her in Pasadena, you know, he said, already having forgotten that apparently Archie had just said that a few moments ago. I met her there, and I loved her right away. I was so nice to her, but she wouldn't even look at me. He slapped the table with the palm of his hand. Wouldn't go home with a ranch hand, no sir. Too good for that. His too loud voice suddenly wobbled. Too good for me. But I showed her. I did everything he asked me to do, and then some. Other patrons of the Sturgis Queen's bar were starting to stare. Archie put a hand on Cal's elbow. Perhaps we should get you to bed, no? It would appear you are winning. Best to quit while you're ahead, is it not? Cal shook his finger at her, squinting. Not yet, he said in a stage whisper. Not yet. I'm not done yet. He turned back to the dealer, who had observed this exchange with the removed patience of experience, and slapped the felt hard enough that one of his stacks of cash fell over. He left his hand where it lay, and his gaze swam up to meet the dealer's eyes. Hit me. The dealer did as he was told, and Archie saw at once that she should not have allowed Cal to touch the table. 21. Again. Excellent, Mr. Hotchkiss. The dealer smiled at Cal, but his smile did not extend to his eyes. He moved his hand as though to shift more cash to Cal's side of the table, but at the last moment, he seized Cal's wrist instead. Archie sprang from her stool, her hand going automatically to her empty holster, as the dealer gripped Cal's wrist and waved his other hand in a signal. Mr. Travers appeared as though from thin air, his hands clasped soberly behind his back. Well now, Mr. Hotchkiss, what have you been up to? The dealer lifted Cal's hand, revealing a single card underneath it. This is the fourth card he swapped, Mr. Travers, sir. I wasn't sure at first, but, well... The dealer smiled at the small army of empty highball glasses that littered the table. He got sloppy. Cal looked from the dealer to Travers' unsmiling face, and then to Archie. His expression was that of a boy who had fallen into a well at dusk, and who has yelled himself hoarse with no answer but the rustle of wind through buzzards' wings. Mr. Travers said, "What? Mr. Hotchkiss," Travers said, reaching into his breast pocket and pulling out a bloody, folded pocket square. "I believe you'll be needing this back." He tucked the pocket square into Cal's shirt pocket. Cal blanched and started muttering the word no, under his breath over and over like an incantation. "Mr. Travers, sir, Cal is drunk. Might I take him up to his room to sleep this off? He's not himself." Archie's voice was dripping honey. Travers regarded her with frank interest. "Why, Miss Archambault, it is so refreshing to see someone willing to stick up for a friend. But I'm afraid that Mr. Hotchkiss is a cheat." He held up a finger, cutting off her interruption. "He may be drunk, but he is still a cheat. He was a cheat before he was drunk, and he'll remain a cheat when he sobers up tomorrow." He took a step away from Cal. The dealer did the same. Cal bolted for the door. The band stopped playing to watch him pass. He was fast, but Travers' security goons were faster. They caught him under the arms mid-stride, hauling him into the air with the brisk efficiency and remorselessness of experience. "No!" he cried, his legs kicking in the air, but finding no purchase, he was dragged bodily across the casino floor. "No, wait, Mr. Travers, sir, please, you can't. After what I did for you, after what I did to that British bastard for you, please, sir, I wasn't." Travers laid his fingertips on Archie's arm, as though to comfort her. "Watch now." And she did. She watched as Travers' men paused at the window, Cal's eyes roaming the room. Sightless with terror, he screamed, he begged. Travers' men did not seem to hear. They swung him once, heave, ho, and his toothpicks fell to the floor, then hurled him bodily through the open window. He screamed as he fell. The splash seemed to echo in the silent casino. Then he screamed again. It was not a scream of terror, but a scream of pain. After a moment, the screaming stopped, but the splashing continued. Travers clapped his hands once in front of his chest and addressed the now silent patrons who filled the gambling tables of his casino. "Ladies and gentlemen, GNCs and non-binary folks, my apologies for the disruption." He turned to the bar. "To make up for it, a round of champagne for everyone on the house." Travers signaled the band and the music started to play once again. He laid his fingertips lightly upon Archie's arm once more as the casino floor erupted in cheers. "I hope, Miss Archambault, that you can understand. Mr. Hotchkiss was a thief, and I cannot abide thieves." His use of the past tense was not lost on Archie. "I, of course, would not even begin to consider allowing his shortcomings to color my opinions of the rest of your little hopper gang." Archie managed to smile and touched his fingertips with her own. I am so grateful, Mr. Travers. We had no idea that Cal..." But she saw his wry, knowing smile and started again. Of course we knew he was a scoundrel, but we would never imagine that he would besmirch your hospitality so. Of course not, Miss Archambault. Of course not. A waiter approached, holding a silver tray of glasses, and Travers handed one to Archie before taking one himself. He touched his glass to hers, making the crystal sing. Cheers, Miss Archambault. May you enjoy your stay on the Sturgis Queen, and the very best of luck in all your endeavors. Sante. Archie answered, and drained her glass without looking away from Traveler's twinkling eyes. Travers signaled the band to play louder, and they did, but the music couldn't mask the bellowing of the ferals fighting over their feast in the river below. Well, 2 down, and now we're on chapter 10. Let's keep going. I'm not sure I understand what you mean, Archie. Houndstooth's voice was low. If Archie hadn't known better, she'd have thought that he was furious. But she did know better. She'd saved the man's life somewhere between 9.5 times and 10 times, and she knew his mood better than her own. So she knew that he was perched on the edge of panic. Dead means dead, Money. Nothing more to it. Houndstooth ran his hands through his hair as he paced back and forth, staring at the carpet. Hero, seated on the divan, following him with their eyes. But if he's dead, then I can't. Then I didn't. Archie put a quelling hand on his shoulder. Perhaps it is best this way, no? She whispered. Without the revenge. He looked up at her, his eyes flashing. How did you know? She looked uncomfortable. Before she had to answer, before she had to tell him what Cal had said just before he died, the door banged open. Adelia stared in at the two of them. Well, Archie, she said, I suppose this means you and I get it. I suppose this means you and I each get our own suite. It also means we're all up to our necks in the bog without so much as a hop to ride, Houndstooth said in a clipped voice. We can't do this without Cal. He began to pace the suite, running his hands through his hair. Hero didn't look up from their whittling. If you're so beside yourself about it, Winslow, I can chew on toothpicks and sling racial slurs with the best of them. Might need to practice some, but I'm sure I can get into fighting shape by morning. Houndstooth laughed, a genuine easy laugh, and then sat down heavily next to the bed. Sat on the bed next to Archie. Look around the room, Hero. What's missing? Hero glanced around the suite. Body odor? Houndstooth laughed again, but this time, the laugh seemed forced. Adelia and Archie exchanged a glance. We're missing a white boy, Adelia murmured, stroking her belly. So what? Archie huffed. If we need one so bad, I'm sure I can drag one up back here for you, Winslow. There's no shortage. Houndstooth was staring at Hero. Hero stared back at him for a long moment. What is it? What are we failing to understand here, Winslow? What's so tough about pulling off this hippo caper without Cal on board? Houndstooth dropped his head into his hands. We need your supplies, Hero. And nobody on the Harriet is going to sell you your supplies. Is going to sell your supplies to a stranger, not even for easy money. We've been corresponding with the dealer, and he's expecting Cal to come buy the goods from him. And we're working with him on the strength of Cal's reputation on the Harriet. He's expecting Cal. He's expecting a white man with a terrible mistake of a mustache. He rubbed his face in his hands, groaning. And it's not a caper, it's an operation. Hero whittled faster, sending hickory shavings flying onto the plush red carpet. Right, all above board. So ask your federal boy. I'm sure the army can send something. Houndstooth looked uncomfortable. I can't ask him. Hero's lips quirked into a half smile. Oh, honestly, you're embarrassed? Houndstooth scowled at them. No, I'm not embarrassed. It's just that he doesn't know what we're going to do here. He's assuming we'll net each feral one by one and escort them out of the swamp. That's why the contract is for a full year. Adelia swore under her breath. That's idiotic. Dangerous, Archie added. That's why we're not doing it that way, Houndstooth said. Houndstooth slapped the edge of the map, his cheeks pink. It was such a great goddamn plan, and it sunk. Hero put a calming hand on his arm. His cheeks reddened further. So, we need a white boy for what? To buy dynamite? Hero nodded. Lots of it. Detonators, fusers, timers, wax. A lot of wax. Archie left the room without saying another word. Where's she going? Adelia asked. Probably to go charm some poor kid into buying Hero supplies. Houndstooth replied. I suppose that's why she's on the team. She could talk a hippo into thinking it was a rhinoceros without breaking a sweat. A few minutes later, the door burst open again, Adelia smirking. Giving up so soon, AR? Oh, she said. Archie stood in the doorway, transformed. She slicked her hair down on either side of a part so razor sharp it put Houndstooth to shame. Her pinstripe breeches and satin waistcoat had been exchanged for a flawlessly tailored three-piece linen suit. She spun a matching bowler hat between her hands. Her boots were half covered by diamond white spats. A blonde mustache, one that would have kept Cal up at night with envy, bristled its way across her upper lip. She had become an impeccably outfitted gentleman. You need a white boy, oui? She asked, her voice pitched an octave lower than usual. Et voilà! Houndstooth gaped at her as Hero crossed the room to examine her. Where did you get this suit? Hero asked. I don't mean any offense, but I can't imagine you just grabbed it off some poor mark in the hallway just now. And that mustache, good God, Archie, is nothing like Cal's, but it'll do. I keep it around for special occasions, Archie replied with a grin. Sometimes my heart calls more to suits than skirts. It's fluid. Oui? Gender fluid. She waved her hand vaguely through the air. It changes. The tailor, he was confused when I told him what I wanted, but for the right price, anything can be had. Isn't that right, Adelia? Adelia's head snapped from where she was staring at the map. Gay? Houndstooth seemed to come to his senses. Archie, you brilliant woman, I could kiss you. Archie and Hero both scowled. You'll ruin my mustache, Houndstooth. Best keep that kiss for someone who wants it, eh? She placed her bowler hat on her head and turned to Hero, whose eyes went wide. Do you have a list for me? A list? Oh, yeah, a list. Of course. Let me just... Hero scrambled for paper and scrawled out a list of supplies and handed it to Archie. Well, my friends, off I go. I expect all three of you to be drunk by the bar when I return. She tipped a wink at Hero. We must make a good show of enjoying our stay at the Sturgis Queen, non? That's amazing. Archie didn't return until the wee hours of the morning. As she and Rosa approached the dock, she looked around at the Harriet. She hadn't really paid attention to it the day before. She had been more focused on the guns Trevor's goons were carrying. Through the night, it had been too dark to really take it in. As the sky began to lighten, she realized that the Harriet was precisely what she had expected. A huge, flat, muddy stretch of water, dotted with tiny islets and bracketed by humps of dogwood-covered land. She found herself wishing it was more beautiful, more shaded and lush, but then, she thought, it would be good marshland for hippos rather than a prison for pharaohs and riverboat thugs. She unloaded Rosa's saddlebags onto the floating dock that bridged the gap between the Sturgis Queen and the paddock. She brushed Rosa's teeth and put medicated drops into the albino hippo's pink eyes. Then she sang Rosa a short lullaby and began dragging her load aboard the boat. She tapped on the door to Hero and Houndstooth's cabin with one fingernail, and then two. When there was no answer, she gave a single rap on the door with her knuckle. Hero answered the door, breathless, tying the belt of a robe around their waist, eyes glassy, swollen lips. Archie grinned wickedly. Glad to see you too, Hero. She thrust the salad back at Hero and turned to leave. Wait! Hero panted. This can't be enough. I need at least 4 times this much dynamite. Archie turned back, her eyes still glinting with delight. Ah, well, you see, they were all out of dynamite. She patted the top of the bulging saddlebag. This is something different, something better. You'll see. We'll discuss it further in the morning. You're busy now, and I'm still very sleepy. She yawned theatrically. Off to bed for both of us, is it not? She sauntered away down the hallway, pulling off the false mustache. Oh, Houndstooth, she murmured to herself, a smile overtaking her face as she remembered the longing look on Winslow's face when Hero had touched his arm the day before. Can't save you this time. You're done for. Hey, the night time is the right time, if you know what I mean. Archie, Hero, and Houndstooth met in the lounge at noon, each of them still blinking sleep in their eyes. Adelia was already seated in their chair, a small armory's worth of freshly whetted knives on a table by her side. The knife she was sliding along the whetstone was familiar. Archie noticed it before Houndstooth did. I thought that thing was lodged too deep in the bull's brain to get out. And how did you get those back from Travers? I thought they were all locked away. Adelia grinned and continued sharpening Houndstooth's ivory-handled blade. I am determined, Archie. Determination is everything. Besides, I had a few years of saving Cal's pistol-ridden ass. You know how it is in the water. Archie watched Adelia's expert hands work. I do know how it is. Knives are Hopper's best friend. Pistols that can't get wet, on the other hand, a nightmare. Adelia laughed. Well, Cal was an idiot, wasn't he? I told him a Hopper with no knives is a dead Hopper, but he didn't want to listen. He lowered her voice in a perfect imitation of Cal. Well, actually, Adelia, a gun's more effective at a distance. See how well that works out for him, huh? Hero and Houndstooth walked to the dining room for coffee, their heads tilted toward each other as they walked. Archie sat across from Adelia, elbows resting on her knees. Adelia, mind if I ask you a question? Adelia did not look up from the blade. Yes, it's Cal's baby. No, I'm not sorry he's dead. Archie shifted uncomfortably. Well, that's good to know, but that's not what I was going to ask. That made Adelia look up. Her face was, for the first time, completely open, and Archie realized she had never seen plain emotion on this woman's face before. What would you like to know, Archie? I don't mean any offense, of course. You are incredibly skilled. Obviously, you're an asset, but why are you here? Adelia's face split into a wide, white smile. Archie realized that one of Adelia's canines was made of gold, and she was reminded strongly of Ruby's deadly tusk. Sharp, deadly tusks. Archie, I'm here to kill you. Archie was startled into laughter. Adelia went back to sharpening Houndstooth's knife. She tested it against her thumbnail and returned it to the whetstone. What? Me? Well, not you precisely, but all of you. Everyone on the team. Archie went very still. I think perhaps I misunderstand your joke. Oh, it's not a joke, Adelia said, although her smile had not faltered. I'm here to kill you all. If anyone goes rogue, if anyone tries to steal the money, if anyone sabotages the plan, I'm supposed to keep an eye on you, per the boss. You mean the Bureau of Land Management or Houndstooth? Adelia did not reply. Aha, Archie said. So you're keeping an eye on us for this boss of yours, but who keeps an eye on you, Adelia Reyes? Archie stood after a long, silent moment and walked into the dining room after Houndstooth and Hero. Adelia watched her go, testing the knife on her thumbnail once more. This time, she found it more than sharp enough. Oh, how the plot thickens. Chapter 11. Almost at about half an hour of recording. Let's keep it up. They met the next day in Hero and Houndstooth's suite to assemble the bombs that would drive the ferals to the gate. So, Hero said, staring into Archie's saddlebag. The man I bought it from, Mr. Wolfenstein, he said you know what this is. He called it the Mother of Satan. Madre del Diablo? Adelia asked. I've heard of that before, I think, but I thought it was just a rumor. Hero took a rapid step away from the saddlebag. No, it's not a rumor at all, Adelia. They aimed a pointed look at Archie. This is extremely volatile. Archie shrugged. Wolfenstein said it was so pure, it could be considered relatively stable. Hero pulled a single tiny white crystal out of the saddlebag and threw it on the ground. It exploded with a loud pop. He said, relatively, Archie said with a shrug. Well, I hope you'll be the one who can handle it, Archie replied. Hope you brought gloves. Archie pulled a long pair of leather gloves from the back pocket of her green breeches. Hero, darling, I always bring gloves. For the remainder of this afternoon, Adelia sat cross-legged on the divan, massaging wax into the leather pouches, rendering them effectively waterproof. Archie filled each wallet with the tiny white crystals of Madre del Diablo and handed each one to Hero, who inserted wires and bits of metal in a configuration that seemed to make sense to them and them alone. Archie asked what Hero was doing, and the response was in no way illuminating. Would you like to discuss the inner workings of a blasting cap, Archie? Because we can discuss the inner workings of a blasting cap if that's what you're looking for. Archie had groaned and shoved Hero's shoulder. If you don't want to tell me, then don't. Hero had smiled and gotten back to work, and Archie had caught Houndstooth beaming at them. After Hero had finished doing whatever it was they were doing to make the bomb sufficiently dangerous, they wrapped each leather pouch around itself a few times. There was more room than they needed, since the crystals were so much smaller and lighter than the dynamite Hero had been expecting. You worked out the equivalency, I suppose? Houndstooth asked. More or less, Hero replied. We might get a bigger bang than we expected, but I think it'll all even itself out in the end. Don't worry, Houndstooth. This hippo caper will go off without a hitch. Houndstooth opened his mouth to reply, and they all responded with him. It's not a caper, it's an operation. The final step was left to Houndstooth. He had a pot of melted wax, kept liquid by water boiling in his travel kettle. Adelia had rolled her eyes at him for bringing it, but there wasn't an inn north of Lafayette that can brew in a simple pot of tea. He sealed each leather pouch, pouring wax over the seams. After the first one was finished, he held it up. It was about the size of both his hands, and didn't look remotely dangerous. Are you certain this will be enough of a bang, Hero? Hero looked up at him with a half smile. I think I know how to create a bang, Houndstooth. Houndstooth's ears turned violet, and he didn't speak again until they had finished making all 20 bombs. That evening, Hero prepared to ride into the Harriet to set up the bombs. Houndstooth accompanied them to the dock at dusk, carrying one of the 2 loaded saddlebags that they need to take out onto the water. Now remember, don't place the charges too close to the dam. I know. You've only told me 1,000 times, Winslow. Hero smiled. I know the dam has a crack. I know we don't want to be the ones to blow it. Trust me, why don't you? Trust me, why don't you? Trust me, why don't you? There we go. Abigail waited for Hero dockside, impatient. She blew bubbles in the water when she saw them approaching. Houndstooth looked at her apologetically, then whistled for Ruby, who had slipped up to the dock like butter sliding across the bottom of a hot pan. You don't have to go alone, you know, Houndstooth said, dropping his saddlebag. Hero regarded him with their steady gaze. Oh, Winslow, if I didn't know better, I think you were worried about me. Houndstooth rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe I just want to go with you. Keep you company. Hero dropped their saddlebag beside his, taking his hand. Or maybe you don't know how to stay behind. Houndstooth grimaced at this insight. I'll be with Ruby. You can't come with me, not riding Abigail. She's louder in the water than a passel of fighting alligators, and if she sees sparrows, she'll probably try to make friends. Besides, you need to stay here. If Travers catches wind of this, you can say I went rogue, that you didn't know I had this all planned. You can say that the whole idea was to get hippos out one at a time, nice and slow like they thought. If they catch us both, it'll be bad for everyone, Houndstooth. You know that. Hero kept going before Houndstooth could interrupt them. Plus, you've got to dispose of the rest of the Madre del Diablo. It only took about half of what Archie brought to get us set up, and we don't want to keep that stuff lying around. Houndstooth was silent for a long moment, staring at Hero's face as though trying to find a constellation in a sea of stars. I wish you weren't so damned brilliant, Hero. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He touched Hero's face with a tentative hand. You'll be a hero, Hero. If this works, you'll be a hero. I just don't want you to be a dead one. I'll be fine, Hero said, smiling. Ruby's the best there is. She won't let anything happen to me. You can trust her, and you can trust me. You don't have to... But Hero's words were stopped by Houndstooth's mouth on theirs, his hands on their waist. I do trust who you know, he whispered against their lips. And just like that, there was nothing left to say. That's so sweet. Adelia found Houndstooth at the bar half an hour later. He was already half drunk, and well on his way to getting whole drunk, if the speed at which he gulped his whiskey meant anything. Mind if I join you? He said, hoisting herself onto a bar stool. Of course, please do, he said politely, signaling the bartender to get her a glass of water. Ever the gentleman? Ever the Englishman, you mean, he replied, speaking into his nearly empty glass. Adelia handed Houndstooth the ivory-handled knife. Here, cleaned and sharpened. Sorry for it. You know. She gestured to his jacket pocket, wiggling her fingers. Reaching in there like that without asking first. Houndstooth turned the knife in his hand a few times, examining the hard work. It looks better than It looks better than it had. It looks better than it has since I got it. You have a gift, Adelia. She smiled. I suppose you can say I have the touch. She sipped her water. You left England to open a ranch here in the States, didn't you, Houndstooth? He nodded. Left home for good when I was 15. It was all I wanted. I didn't know any better. Do you miss it? England? What? Every day. And not at all. They didn't like me there, you know, he said, swaying a little on his bar stool. They didn't like a damn thing about me, other than my name. Adelia laughed. I meant being a rancher. You used to own a ranch, see? You used to breed your very own, like Ruby. She put a hand on his arm, steadying him, then quickly withdrew her hand. Houndstooth signaled for another drink. I'd rather not discuss it, if you don't mind. It ended badly, and after all, I'm English. We don't like to discuss. It's okay, she said, resting her hand on her belly. I actually already know what happened about the fire. Cal told me. She watched Houndstooth closely. He stared into the glass of brown liquor that appeared in front of him. Did he now? He murmured into the whiskey. Did he tell you? Adelia waited. Did he tell you? Houndstooth repeated. Did he tell you about who burned down my ranch? Did he tell you about why he hid on the Harriet for all these years, knowing Travers wouldn't let me in? Oh, he knew. Houndstooth said, mistaking Adelia's stillness for doubt. Travers would never let me through the gate. I turned him down when he asked me to help introduce more vicious strains into the feral population. He spent years trying to change my mind, but I wouldn't budge. Frankly, I'm surprised he didn't burn down my ranch himself. He glanced over at Adelia, understanding dawning across his face. She interrupted, talking fast and low. Don't you ever wish you could go back to it? Houndstooth, just leave this place, give up the capers, give up the vendetta, just take the money and run? He stared at her, his brow knit. Run? You know. She made a shooing motion with her hand. Leave. He shook his head, and it made him sway hard. I can't just... She grabbed his face in both hands, steadying him. She looked into his eyes with urgent intensity. He feared for a moment that she would try to kiss him. She hissed through her teeth. Forget what you came to do here, Houndstooth. Forget revenge. Leave. Leave tonight. Houndstooth, you rascal. I have been looking for you everywhere. Archie's voice filled the bar, and Adelia jumped away from Houndstooth. He looked at her as though she'd suddenly grown hippo ears, bewilderment writ plain across his normally stoic Englishman's face. Archie stood in the doorway, beaming, and walked toward them. Adelia, how are you feeling? Do your feet pain you at the end of such a long day? I thought they might, so I asked the bellboy to prepare you a soak of warm water and lavender in the lounge. Ignoring Adelia's protest, Archie helped her down from the bar stool and began walking her toward the lounge. I asked him to bring a little glass of wine with honey in it to settle the bébé. Her voice was as bright as the edge of a freshly sharpened knife. I know she has been kicking you right in the gut these past few days. They rounded the corner to the lounge, leaving Houndstooth to stare, lost, into his whiskey at the bar. The moment he was out of sight, Archie rounded on Adelia, sticking a finger in her face. What the hell do you think you're doing? Adelia's nostrils flared. She jutted her jaw toward Archie, saying, It's something called flirting. Archie snorted. I would hardly call it anything that advanced. What are you thinking? For the first time in the 10 years I've known him, he likes someone that's worth his time. You stay out of it, Adelia. Archie's eyes went wide with surprise as he registered the pain in her side. I got you right here, but I didn't think he'd jump in the blade right after you, Adelia whispered. Her knife dug into Archie's side, the point of it pressed between her ribs. If there's one thing I know about Winslow Houndstooth, it's that he cannot be tied down, no matter how much he likes the latest flower he's landed on. An ugly, brittle smile crept across her face. Just because he wouldn't have you. Archie cut her off with a laugh. He's not my type, Sturdy. Put your knife away. You're embarrassing yourself, even more here than you were at the bar. She took a deft step away from Adelia's blade and turned to walk back into the bar. Try to calm yourself down, eh? She called over her shoulder. I think the baby's making you crazy. Adelia stared after her. Archie's voice drifted back to her from the bar. Ah, Houndstooth, right where I left you. How about some water to befriend that whiskey in your belly, huh? You should be keeping your wits about you during our big caper. It's not a caper, came the weary reply. Adelia looked down at the knife in her hand. A drop of Archie's blood fell from the tip of the blade to the plush red carpet at her feet, blending right in. Well, 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 Miss Reyes, came a smooth, sleek voice from the shadows of the lounge. What on earth have you been up to? Hero finished rigging the bombs in the wee hours of the morning. They were pleased by the simplicity of the setup. Each one of the waxed leather wallets was fixed to the top of an existing buoy in the Harriet, keeping them safe from accidental bumps in early detonation. The wax was a precaution. One never knew what might happen to a buoy during a stampede of ferals, but Hero felt fairly confident that the risk of immersion was low and that the chances of success were incredibly high. As they nudged Ruby toward the floating dock next to the hippo paddock of the Sturgis Queen, Hero raised one hand to their lips and felt a smile lingering there. Houndstooth. He had a reputation. Every one of the hoppers on this team had a reputation, but he had turned out to be so much more than an English snob with a taste for pretty eyes. Hero wondered what would happen when the job was over. Would they go home together to Hero's little house with its little pond? Retirement alone had been dull and lonely, and not the respite that they so needed. But what if Houndstooth were there? Maybe sitting on the porch and drinking sweet tea and watching the fireflies come out. Wouldn't be such a lonesome proposition anymore. Maybe it would be the peaceful retirement they'd been hoping for when they bought the little house with the little pond. Maybe, Hero thought, closing the paddock gate and turning Ruby loose. Maybe. They walked up the dock, exhausted, and walked into the entryway of the Sturgis Queen. Upstairs, they knew Houndstooth would still be awake, watching the window for their return. They could sleep beside him for a few hours before it was time for the action to begin. To Hero's surprise, there were voices in the lounge. The Sturgis Queen was supposed to be empty during the night. All the gamblers and drinkers headed for the inn or to one of Travers's pleasure barges to recover from their losses and headaches. The voices that Hero heard weren't shouting over a craps table, though. They were soft ones, voices that didn't want to be heard. Hero paused at the foot of the stairs when they heard a familiar accent drifting through the doorway. Their plan will work, and it will work quickly. It's going to happen today. The pharaohs will be gone by nightfall. Adelia, the skin on the back of Hero's neck prickled. Oh, Adelia, did you even try to seduce the Englishmen? The voice that answered Adelia was rich, smooth, slick. Travers. Hero swore under their breath. Archie was right. I told you I don't do seduction. Besides, the Frenchman got in the way, and... excuses. That knife would be put to better use. That knife would be put to better use elsewhere, Miss Reyes, came Travers' reply. In Miss Archambault's heart, for example, in Mr. Houndstooth's gullet. Hero covered their mouth with both hands, as Travers suggested ways to kill the hoppers with all like the swagger of a maitre d' reading off the specials. The time for manipulation and the arrangement of coincidences over, Adelia. Travers continued, his voice growing cool. I've been willing to work with you to maintain your illusion of camaraderie, but now we do things my way. A creak and a rustle of cloth. I have business to attend to out on the water tonight. Find me back here before noon. Bring Houndstooth's tongue with you as proof that you've done your job. No ears, no toes. Understand? That's a good girl. Hero heard Adelia shout something that had the cadence of a vicious term. A door slammed, one or both of them leaving the room via a different entrance. Hero immediately turned to creep up the stairs to their room, each step cautious and silent. They moved slowly, trying to keep the boat from creaking under the weight of their footfalls. They had to tell Houndstooth. They had to tell him. And they had to do... what? Something. Anything. But then the door behind them swung open and it was too late. Adelia's face was already contorted with restrained rage from her conversation with Travers. When she saw Hero standing there, so close to the door to the lounge that it was impossible for them to not have heard everything, her expression dropped into something like relief. Hero, she said, a slow smile spreading across her lips. I suppose you finished rigging the bombs. I suppose you haven't been up to tell Houndstooth that you were successful. I suppose you just wanted to worry before you got to go up to bed? Hero took several steps backward, but they were too late to dodge Adelia's lightning-quick knives. They didn't even see her hand move before they felt the pain in their gut. Hero dropped their hands to the hilt of the knife that protruded from their belly like the stump of a silvery umbilicus. Before they could so much as begin making an appeal to Adelia. An appeal for what? Mercy? Surely it was too late for that. Hero felt a blow strike them in the chest, like a punch, and there, like magic, the hilt of another knife had sprouted from their chest. Hero fell to the plush red carpet of the entryway at the bottom of the stairs. They looked up the stairs, away from Adelia, toward the suite where Houndstooth was waiting for them. They wanted to scream, to shout, to warn him, but it was so hard to draw breath. They hiccuped with pain and tasted copper. They fought, they struggled, and managed to draw a single lungful of air. No, no, sweet Hero. Adelia's whisper was right next to Hero's ear. The last thing Hero saw before they passed out was Houndstooth, standing at the top of the stairs, his mouth open in a scream to answer the one for which Hero had been able to find breath. Okay, folks. Chapter 12. Less than 40 pages left. Let's do this. Let's do this for real. Archie sat on the divan and watched Houndstooth pace. Shiri, you should have a drink. Sit down. Something. You're driving me crazy with the pacing. I can't sit down. Not until we decide what to do with her. Adelia sat in a high-backed chair, bound by lashings of rope, her head lolled to one side. A significant bruise marred her head where Archie had struck her with a well-flung hammer strike as she attempted to run away from Hero's still body. Hero lay on the bed, breathing ragged, their wounds packed with the torn scraps of one of Houndstooth's silk shirts. The wounds had not been shallow, but Hero's sternum had stopped Adelia's knife from hitting their heart, and the blood pouring from their belly had slowed just enough to give Houndstooth a sliver of hope. You're certain she's in spying? Houndstooth asked Archie for the 100th time. Archie lifted a handful of papers she found in Adelia's belongings, a contract, signed in Adelia's loopy cursive and Travers' delicate calligraphy. Houndstooth? Houndstooth. Winslow, Remington, Houndstooth. Look at me, Archie commanded. Houndstooth stopped and obeyed, staring at her with lost eyes, hands limp by his sides. We have to kill her, Houndstooth. We have to kill her, and we have to run. Now. Tonight. Leaving, are you? Came the low drawl from the doorway. They hadn't heard Grant Carter enter, but there he was, leaning against the doorframe, 6 feet, 3 inches of coiled muscle. His hands were nowhere near the 6-shooters that dangled from his hips, but Houndstooth and Archie both froze, as though he were pointing the guns directly at them. I don't believe we've had the pleasure, Mr. Houndstooth. He extended his hand to Houndstooth, who shook it out of sheer reflex. Grant Carter, U.S. Marshal. You have something I've been looking for. He tipped his black hat at Archie. Good to see you again, Archie. How have you been? I've been well, Gran. I've been busy. I'm sorry I haven't written. Archie sounded like she meant it. Oh, that's fine. I know how time gets away from you. He took a small step toward her, a smile twitching at the corners of his mouth. I've missed you. Archie looked at her hands, worrying at the contract that sat in her lap. Now's not the time, Gran. Gran cleared his throat, looking at Houndstooth. Mr. Houndstooth, I believe you're in charge of this hippo caper. Houndstooth looked simultaneously pained and affronted. It's not a caper, Mr. Carter. Behind him, Archie mouthed the words at him, mouthed the words along with him. It's an operation, all above board. We were hired by the federal government. I'll have you know. And, oh, my apologies, Mr. Houndstooth. I misspoke. Of course, it only makes sense that the federal government of the United States of America would hire a team of down-and-out criminals for a caper on the Harriet. It's not a caper. Yes, well, at any rate, Carter grinned at Archie. Miss Reyes is none of your concern. She's hardly a member of your crew at this point, is she? Houndstooth seemed uncertain as to how he should respond. Adelia had been a member of the crew until 30 minutes ago, but now, with Hero's blood on her hands, I'll make this easy. Carter said, with the same relaxed grin. Miss Reyes here is a fugitive, and I've been chasing her down these past 5 years. She killed 2 good men in Arizona while she was on the run from California 10 months ago, where she killed 3 more good men, and I'm near about fed up with her giving me the slip. I arranged with my contact at the Bureau of Land Management to get her on board for this here caper, to make sure she'd be on the Harriet. Houndstooth opened his mouth to interrupt, but Carter didn't give him an opening. I've been tracking her ever since. I was going to wait until the caper was done to pick her up. But seeing as how you've got her all trussed up for me and Travers is out of the way, he spread his hands in a gesture of acquiescence to fate. Seems to me the time is ripe. He gestured to Hero. I'll even take your friend here to a doctor on my way out of town. It looks like you've done well by them, but that, he pointed to the wound in Hero's stomach, that's more than you can handle. Archie and Houndstooth looked at each other. Archie spoke first. Travers. Do you know where he is? They were working together. Ah, Carter said. Last I saw, he was on a raft heading towards the dam. Gran, do you mind if we confer for a moment? Archie asked seriously. You go on right ahead. I'll get this package all wrapped up and ready for transport. Carter responded, unhooking a pair of heavy manacles. I'm not gonna try and pronounce that word right. Heavy handcuffs from his belt and turned into Adelia. Houndstooth and Archie stepped into the hall. Houndstooth stared over his shoulder at Carter as the door swung shut. Will Adelia be safe with him? He asked Archie, rubbing at his eyes. He will not be unkind to her if you're worried. Not that she deserves kindness, Archie growled. And if she dies and Hero makes it to a doctor, I think it will have been worth the risk. No? Winslow cringed. Winslow, you are exhausted. You should get some rest before we leave. If Travers went all the way to the dam, we have at least an hour before he returns. I will pack, you will sleep. No, Houndstooth said, looking up at her with urgency. I don't want to sleep, Archie. I don't want to leave. I want to finish the job we came here to do. Archie looked at Houndstooth as though he claimed to hear a hippo singing a French lullaby. What? Houndstooth, you are not in your right mind. I know you're worried about Hero, but we can't do it. We don't have any way to set up the bombs, and even if we did, we have no way to know how to do it. And even if we did know how to do it, we don't know when to detonate the charges. And Houndstooth shook his head. You're wrong. For once in your life, Archie, you're completely wrong. I've never felt so clear about what we need to do. We need to do this job. I promised Hero that they'd be a hero, that their name would be in children's history books for decades to come, as the mastermind behind the bombs that cleared the hippos out of the Mississippi. His eyes had taken on a wild gleam, and we're going to do it. We're going to get Hero's name in the history books, God damn it, whether this job is legitimate or not. When Hero wakes up, I'm going to go and tell them about how their plan worked. And as for the bombs, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim black device, Hero's detonator. They gave this to me before they left to set up the bombs, just in case something happened. He laughed, a lost, wild laugh, and Archie's brow furrowed further. Houndstooth, she murmured, I have to tell you something. Something I should have told you before, but... She took a deep breath and rushed through her excuse. But you have spent so many years hating Calhoun, and when he died, it seemed like maybe you would be able to let this go. Like, maybe you would be able to stop chasing revenge. Houndstooth looked at her out of the corner of his eye. You sounded like Adelia for a moment there. If you're determined to go through with this, I'll be with you. You know that I wouldn't let you do this alone, but we might not both make it out of here, so I have to tell you before we set out. She looked at Houndstooth as though hoping he'd interrupt, but he simply watched her with terrible patience. She took another deep breath, steeling herself. Cal, right before he died, he said he betrayed you for Travers. I think. Winslow, friend, I think Travers put him up to it. Travers is the reason your ranch burned down. Houndstooth stared at Archie and then looked at the detonator in his hands. He turned it over between his fingers, his jaw finally working. I think I knew that, he said. I think she told me. She shook his head. He shook his head. Well, I suppose that makes this a little bit sweeter. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Archie said. No, I understand, really. Archie smiled, relieved. Her smile faded when Houndstooth continued. But I do hope you understand. I'm going to destroy Travers. I'm going to destroy everything he's built, everything he holds dear, everything he's poured his life and his passion and his fortune into. I'm going to burn his world to the ground, and then I'm going to salt the ashes for what he did to my ranch and for what has happened to Hero. A shadow seemed to pass across his eyes as a broad, toothsome grin spread across his face. Oh, yes, Archie. He will suffer. Archie's face was bloodless. Houndstooth, we can't. But what couldn't they do? She never got to ask, because the door to the suite burst open. Grand Carter emerged, covered in his own blood. Archie screamed. Houndstooth looked at her, more startled than he had been when he saw Carter himself. He had never heard Archie scream before. I'm fine, Carter said, placing his bloody hands on Archie's shoulder. I'm fine, just a lot of little cuts. Archie just... He clasped her close to him for a brief moment, then pushed her away, holding her shoulders at arm's length. She's gone. Out the window into the water. I don't think she was unconscious after all. The moment I got close enough, he was backing away as he told them toward the stairs. I'm sorry. I have to go. I have to catch her before she... If she's in the water, the problem is solved, right? Houndstooth interrupted. The Ferals. In the distance, the sound of Zara and Stasia bellowing cut through the insect noises in the night. She's at the paddock, Archie said. The Ferals must be feeding in the middle of the lake. They're not here yet. Go, Grandma, safe in the water. Go! He shoved her hands at him as though to push him away. Houndstooth noted that her eyes were filled with tears. Wait! Houndstooth shouted. Hero, you promised! Carter doubled back and raced toward them, emerging with Hero in his arms. I'm sorry, Archie. I'll see you again. I swear it! Carter shouted as he bounded down the stairs. I'll see you again! They watched them leave. Archie wiped her eyes and looked down at herself. She was covered in Carter's blood from when he held her. Well, she said, laughing, I have forgotten what I was going to say to you, Houndstooth, about your grief and your fear and about not being in your right mind. She plucked at her wet, bloody shirt. I suppose we should get dressed and we should get detonating, we? Houndstooth grinned. Let's blow up the Harriet. All right. Chapter 13. Exactly 37 pages left. Strong finish. Let's do this. Archie and Houndstooth made their way to the hippo paddock in silence as the stars began to wink out. When they arrived at the paddock, Ruby, Rosa, Abigail, and Betsy were already nosing at each other, competing for attention at the dock. Archie pulled up short. Houndstooth? She said, What should we do about Abigail and Betsy? We can't leave them, he replied. Hero will want to see Abigail when they wake up. Do you think they'll follow us like Stasia and Zara? If they do, they'll make a decent rear guard if any feral try to sneak up on us. I suppose there's only one way to find out, he shrugged. Archie looked at him strangely. What? What? Nothing, she replied. I've just never seen you shrug before. It doesn't look right on you, Houndstooth. Fortunately, Abigail and Betsy did indeed trail behind Ruby and Rosa as they made their way to the gate. Following the trail of apples, Houndstooth was dropping into the water every few minutes. Archie stifled a laugh when she noticed him doing it. Where did you get those? She asked. I like to be prepared, Archie, he replied, his voice dripping with condescension. Did you steal them from my saddlebag? Houndstooth took his time before answering. Here wait all my pears, he said in an even tone. Then he snapped the side of Ruby's harness, and the two of them sped ahead toward the gate. So, we opened the gate. We hit the detonator. The Ferals flood the gate while we watched from a safe distance. We closed the gate. Easy. Archie had repeated the plan 6 or 7 times on the way over. Each time, she proclaimed how easy it would be to execute. Houndstooth, having hardly heard a word of what she said, watched the water as they traveled, but it was still and silent, save for the occasional grumbles of the 4 hippos and their 2 riders. And it was easy. No pharaohs bothered them as they made their way from the Sturgis Queen to the gate, though their bellows floated through the still night air like thunder from where they were gathered in the muddy center of the lake. Archie and Houndstooth reached the gate without incident. The ranger's familiar broad-brimmed hat was silhouetted in the gray light of the early morning. Houndstooth called up to the tower. Hello up there, can you open the gate? Houndstooth called. Official government business. The ranger didn't respond. Houndstooth repeated his request. When he received no response, he looked at Archie. She shrugged. Perhaps he's asleep? Surely we could go up there and wake him. Ruby, however, refused to approach the ranger's tower. She balked and danced, avoiding the place where the tower ladder met the water. What's gotten into you, Ruby Roo? Houndstooth asked, tugging on the reins of her harness. She ducked her head below the water and blew a rude series of bubbles, turning her back to the gate once again. Ruby, what? Ruby! Houndstooth cried out indignantly as Ruby dipped into the water once more, soaking him to the waist. Ruby, you damned impertinent cow! Stop this behavior immediately! Houndstooth yanked on Ruby's harness, and she reluctantly nudged closer to the ladder. Houndstooth jumped off of her, catching himself on the ladder, then looked back to where the sleek black hippo was fidgeting in the water. We'll have words later, you and I, he muttered to her. She flapped her ears at him, and he was struck suddenly with a sense of unease. Archie, do you mind staying down here to keep an eye on her? Lord only knows what's gone into her this time. Archie saluted from her perch atop Rosa's back. Houndstooth returned to the salute and began to climb. He reached the top of the ladder and shouted another greeting to the ranger, not wanting to startle the man with the rifle. Hello up here. I'm coming up and I'm not armed. I'm coming up but I'm unarmed. He crested the top of the ladder and found himself inside a little box of a sentry tower. His eyes adjusted to the dimly lit outpost, and he realized that there were two men in the tower with him. The ranger, in his wide hat, was silent. It was... Wait. What the hell? Alright, I'm gonna read that over again, I'm sorry. Houndstooth crested the top of the ladder and found himself inside a little box of a sentry tower. His eyes adjusted to the dimly lit outpost, and he realized that there were two men in the tower with him. The ranger, in his white hat, was silent. It was the other man who spoke. Oh, good, came the second man's smooth, soft reply. I was worried you bring weapons with you, and then I have to kill you myself. With that, Travers shoved the ranger over the edge of the tower. The utter lack of resistance the man showed to being pushed told Houndstooth that he was already dead when they had arrived. Travers turned to face Houndstooth, a thin smile on his face and a revolver in his hand. Well, Houndstooth said, raising his arms. Well, Houndstooth said, raising his hands slowly into the air. I know when I'm outmatched. Are you going to kill me, Travers? No, certainly not, Travers drawled, advancing a few steps. The Pharaohs will take care of that for me. They take care of most of my problems for me, you know. Cheaters, thieves, nosy inspectors, mercenary hoppers who don't know when to go home with their tails between their legs. He took another step toward Houndstooth. I'll have that detonator in your pocket if you don't mind. Houndstooth kept his hands in the air. His voice was cold as he watched Travers advance. I don't know what you mean, Travers. Hero, have the detonator. Travers laughed. I sound like molasses dripping into the bottom of a barrel. Oh, don't play games with me, Mr. Houndstooth. The house always wins. He pointed his gun at Houndstooth's bulging breast pocket. Right there. Quickly now, before my men have to motivate you. He gestured down at the water, and Houndstooth leaned as far toward the ledge as he dared. Travers' goons held Archie at gunpoint. She looked up at Houndstooth, disgruntled. 4-on-1, eh, Travers? Not too sporting of you. Oh, Miss Archibald could easily take on 2 of them, perhaps even 3. I wouldn't put it past her. But I play to win, Mr. Houndstooth. Now, let's not waste any more time. Give me the detonator, and I'll let you go down to her. You two can try to escape, or at least you can die together. He cocked back the hammer on the revolver. Come now, I don't have all day. Houndstooth held up the detonator, and before he could say a word, Travers had taken it from him. Thank you, Houndstooth. You know, I'd been expecting someone sly. Not you, though, Travers said, flipping the detonator in his hand. This really does make my life so much easier. Fat lot of good it will do you. Houndstooth laughed despite himself. That's 1 detonator. You do realize who hired us, don't you? The federal government won't be deterred by one little weasel of a man with a revolver. They will get these hippos out of the Harriet, Travers. Your tiny kingdom will crumble. Travers grinned, a dark joy spreading across his face. Travers grinned, a dark joy spreading across his face. Oh, Mr. Houndstooth, I want the hippos out of the Harriet too, just not quite the same way. He began to pace. My little kingdom will become an empire. Just me, my riverboats, the pharaohs, from Minnesota to the Harriet. The Houndstooth watched Travers like a mouse watching a snake. And how exactly are you going to get your riverboats over the dam, Travers? Travers held up the detonator. Your little crew of hoppers help me with that, Mr. Houndstooth. Houndstooth frowned, not following the logic. Oh, yes. Yes, you see, Delia told me all about the bombs you planted in the river. How handy. A whole passel of bombs already rigged for my convenience. He paused in his pacing, his face shining with excitement. Last night, while you were crying over your departed little lover, I was all out in the water, moving the buoys they set up. All 16. Oh, it wasn't easy, he hastened to add, mistaking Houndstooth's dawning horror for unbelief. But I've always been a determined man, Mr. Houndstooth. Determination is everything. You're going to blow the dam, Houndstooth breathed, his head swimming with implications. Oh, yes, Mr. Houndstooth. Travers replied fervently. I'm going to blow the dam. I'm going to send a flood of pharaohs up the Mississippi, along with all the little hops. I'm going to seed the water with teeth and reap my reward. His voice descended into a harsh growl. I'm going to own this river. He raised the detonator high, and Houndstooth knew he was going to press the button, destroying the dam, destroying Hero's legacy, destroying his chance at vengeance. Houndstooth launched himself at Travers, knocking the man off his feet. They landed at the very edge of the ranger's platform. The revolver spun off, splashing into the water 30 feet below. The detonator clattered to the floor, just out of reach. Houndstooth pressed his arm against Travers' throat. Do you remember when I said I was unarmed, Travers? Houndstooth pulled the ivory-handled knife from his belt. Adelia had sharpened it so finely that the edge was nearly invisible. I lied. Travers grinned savagely. Do you remember when I said I wouldn't kill you, Houndstooth? Houndstooth felt a pain in his side. I lied, too. Houndstooth's vision went briefly red. He slashed wildly, and when his vision had cleared, Travers' face had been slit from brow to lip. Blood flowed into his eye and mouth and ran hideously down the side of his face. That, he spat with grim satisfaction, was for killing Cal before I had the chance. He slashed again, leaving another gash across Travers' face, marking him with a bold, bleeding X. And that was for my ranch. The ranch you couldn't burn down yourself, you fucking coward. He went to step forward to deliver the killing blow, but he found that something was tugging at his side. He reached out a hand to free himself. All the wind seemed to leave Houndstooth's lungs as his fingers found the hilt of a tiny knife that protruded from his side. Just like Hero, he thought. Travers took Houndstooth's moment of distraction as an opportunity. He hit the hilt of the knife with the heel of his hand, shoving it farther into Houndstooth's side. As Houndstooth roared in pain, Travers scrambled for the detonator. Houndstooth tried to reach him, tried to stop him, slipped in Travers' blood, and fell hard. Travers had the detonator. He raised it over his head and pressed the button. Houndstooth half expected to die right then and there. He half expected the entire Harriet to blow up. What he didn't expect, not even for a moment, was for the detonator to fail, because Hero had made the detonator, and Hero was the smartest person Houndstooth had ever met. And he had been right. The bombs did not fail. A rumble like thunder sounded in the distance. Houndstooth looked out of the ranger's outpost, and he saw a cloud rising through the pink morning. The pink morning light in the distance. He yanked the blade out of his side. It was a short one. Too short to have done any serious damage, but it hurt like hell. He threw the knife over the side of the tower as Travers laughed. When he looked, Travers was clutching his face, holding the flap of his lip in place with one bloody hand. You've done it, Houndstooth whispered. You crazy bastard, you've done it. I've done it, and there's not a damn thing you can do to stop these hippos from filling the Mississippi. Houndstooth looked over the edge of the ranger's tower into the rippling water. His heart stopped a moment. Travers, open the gate. Travers remained on the floor, laughing hysterically. Travers, open the gate, damn you, open it! Houndstooth made for the large lever that would start the gate opening, but Travers grabbed his leg. Don't bother. Travers gasped through his laughter. I've disabled it. Cut the cable. It won't open. The hippos can only go north now. Look outside, Travers. Houndstooth urged the bleeding, cackling man. Look at the water. Travers rolled to one side. He was close enough to the edge of the platform to look over. His laughter stopped abruptly. Do you see that? Houndstooth asked, pointing down at the debris that was rapidly collecting against the gate, battering Archie and the hippos. That's the front of the wave. You blew the dam, Travers. All the water that was behind the dam is heading our way, and it's going to carry everything with it. Travers grinned, pulling himself to his feet. He needed both hands to do it. When he dropped his hand from his face, his skin fell open in a ghastly gash. Well, he said, good thing I'm up here, isn't it? The waters won't be rising above 30 feet. Looks like all those pharaohs will be trapped against the gate. And I'm sure they'll be hungry. He placed a hand firmly on Houndstooth's back. Enjoy the flood, Houndstooth. He pushed hard, and Houndstooth flipped over the railing, falling into the rising waters of the Harriet. Geronimo, chapter 14, 11:30 on the clock. Let's go. Archie watched the cloud of dust billow across the horizon as the dam blew. A wave emerged out of the spray falling detritus. All right, it's finally time. I've been waiting for this moment. Well, not really, but I'm tired of not knowing the words. I gotta know at least this one, because I've seen it before, but I can't really pronounce it, and I cannot stand for that. Not one bit. Everybody doing good? Oh, we have a viewer. Hey, viewer. In case you're wondering what's going on, we are reading River Teeth by Sarah Gailey. We're on chapter 14, right at the stop, and I can't pronounce this word, so we're going to find out what the heck it is. Stick around. Let's see here. The word in question that I cannot pronounce is spelled D-I-T-R-I-T. Wait, I put an S. Sorry, guys. D-I-T-R-I. There we go. Now, let's start over, shall we? Good, here we go. Chapter 14. Once again. Archie watched the cloud of Archie watched the cloud of dust billow across the horizon as the dam blew. A wave emerged out of the spray falling detritus. There you go. Thank you, Google. A huge ripple that didn't crest, but instead grew as it approached. Even at a distance, it was big enough that she could see the shadows that it pushed. It pushed ahead. Boats, buoys, and ferals. She watched as Travers shoved Houndstooth over the edge of the range outpost. She watched as he fell. In the moment before Houndstooth hit the water, the wave hit the gate. Archie, Rosa, Betsy, Abigail, and Rudy all rode the swell, slamming into the gate as the wave broke against it. Betty let out a pained roar before the water crested over her head. Houndstooth slammed into the gate next to Ruby. Archie suspected that this was no accident. The Cambridge Black had watched her hopper closely as he fell. A moment later, he was on Ruby's back, looking dazed and sodden, but whole. Archie breathed a sigh of relief at the sight of Houndstooth, safe. Then she realized that none of them were safe at all. Behind her, two of Travers' goons screamed. Archie turned to see their mangled bodies trapped between the gate and a weather-beaten canoe. The current, fast now and relentless, kept the canoe pressed against them, and the water rose interminably over their heads. They struggled in vain to free themselves. Archie urged Rosa forward, with only a moment of hesitation, but before she could reach the men, a shadow loomed overhead. She wheeled Rosa around and saw Houndstooth, already fleeing along the length of the gate. Archie followed him, pressing Rosa forward, trying to get out of the path of the fast-approaching Sturgis Queen. Travers' other riverboats were tethered, docked, anchored hard, but they would have flipped over and sunk under the wave. but the Sturgis Queen was designed a tool around the Harriet, providing gamblers with a constantly changing view of the scenery. The huge wave had swept it to the gate, and had nearly filled the narrow passage. Archie looked over her shoulder and could see nothing but the planks of the boat as it rushed toward her. Rosa slammed into the sentry tower with all the force of her 3,000 pounds. Archie pressed herself against the hippel's back as the boat barreled toward her. In front of her, Houndstooth did the same, pressing one hand against the stone of the tower as if it could steady him. And then the boat was passing them, not missing them. The leg of Archie's breeches tore open, and she felt half her skin go with the fabric, but not striking them, not killing them. The boat slammed into the gate with a deafening crash. The current was strong, and the Sturgis Queen was massive, but the gate was bigger. The gate was stronger. It groaned under the impact of the riverboat, but it held. The water at the base of the boat flushed pink with the pulp of the two men who had been crushed against the grate. The debris that the current pushed toward it gathered against the hull of the Sturgis Queen, sticks and leaves and a half-rotted rowboat. As Archie watched, a tiny squirming hop poked his head out of the water, scrabbling against the side of the boat. Trappers remaining two goons eased around the corner of the sentry tower. They didn't seem to notice Archie and Houndstooth. They splashed in the water, arguing over who would be the first up the ladder and into the ranger's tower to safety. One of them managed to dunk the other and clambered over him toward the ladder. The man in the water reached up an arm to grab his colleague's leg. With a jerk and a splash, the man disappeared under the water. He came back up again, sputtering. Then he was airborne, flipped by the nose of the first adult feral to reach the gate. Archie and Houndstooth watched as the man flailed between the feral's jaws. The man screamed in ear-splitting agony as his blood ran down the hippel's jowls and into the water. His colleague scrambled up the ladder for safety, not looking back even as the screams died with a wet crunch. "Archie," Houndstooth said, his voice thick. "I think this might be it." "You may be right, Houndstooth," Archie replied grimly, "but I am determined to live, and determination is everything, is it not?" She swung her meteor hammer in a wide circle over her head and watched the water as the ferals surged toward them. Borne on the swell of the current, the heavy metal head whipped through the air as it gained speed. At first, the ferals didn't notice Houndstooth and Archie. They were smacking into each other, into the Sturgis Queen. They bellowed and bit as the water shoved them into one another. One of the bulls let out a roar that rattled Houndstooth's very bones. The first feral to notice them was a small female, with a long crack running through one of her fangs. She whipped toward them, fury in her wild eyes, and charged. Rosa fled left, carrying Archie out of the path of danger and far from Houndstooth, but Ruby did not follow. She let out a roar that put the raging feral bulls to shame. She turned her wide mouth toward the attacker and opened it, ready to fight. Her golden tusks glinted in the sun. Houndstooth unsheathed his knives, bracing his knees in the saddle, and bared his teeth, echoing Ruby's stance. Water fanned in front of the feral as she bore down on Ruby and Houndstooth, her own jaw yawning wide. But then a brown blur slammed into her from one side, knocking her into the water. Betsy. Sweet, small, battle-scarred Betsy bowled the feral over, sinking her fangs into its flank before it had a chance to recover from the impact. "Betsy!" Houndstooth cried as the little brown hippo disappeared into the roil of ferals. He looked around for Archie, but she, too, seemed to have vanished into the fray. A gray-backed hippo brushed up against Ruby, and Houndstooth jumped, prepared to fight, but it was Abigail. Cowardly Abigail. Hero's Abigail, trying desperately to hide between Ruby and the tower. A roar drew Houndstooth's attention back to the roiling mass of ferals who were savagely fighting each other as the water buffeted them into the gate. Houndstooth's safe shelter against the tower was keeping him and Ruby out of the worst of the current, but it was too much to hope that they would completely escape notice, and Abigail's flight had drawn the attention of a huge one-eyed bull. It was that bull whose roar that had shaken Houndstooth's bones, a roar that was directed to cowering Abigail. The bull began to move toward them, parting a path through the seething mass of gray that was the feral melee. Houndstooth went cold with fear. His massive head swung to and fro as he snapped at the other's small as he snapped at the other smaller ferals. He was coming for them, and they would not stand a chance. Houndstooth tried to steer Ruby out of the way, tried to maneuver her out of the path of certain death, but she would not budge. Houndstooth cast his gaze frantically around for Archie, but he could not see her, and there was no time because the bull was free of the tangle of ferals and he was charging at Ruby with all the fury of a freight train. Ruby did not bellow at the bull. She stared at him. She stared at him dead on, and Houndstooth could have sworn that he felt her tremble. Time seemed to Houndstooth to have slowed to a crawl. He patted Ruby's flank with an unsteady hand. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, trying to accept that there was no way out of the path of the bull, but he realized that closing his eyes did not make it easier to face his death. He would never see Hero again, and he couldn't swallow that with his eyes closed. His eyes flew open just in time for him to see Rosa. She galloped around from the other side of the ranger's tower, water shearing before her, a white blur with Archie standing on top her back. Archie yelled, a thundering cry that made even the feral bull hesitate for a moment in his charge. Archie, magnificent Archie, swung her meteor hammer hard and released it. It flew true and straight and hit the bull hard between the eyes with a crack like lightning. Blood stained the water. The bull stood in the water and swayed like a drunk, his eyes still locked on Ruby. He made a single unsteady movement forward. Houndstooth threw a knife and it sunk deep into the hippo's remaining eye, a surreal echo of Adelia's strike back at the islet. The islet where Neville had died. The beast fell. Archie crowed as Rosa crowded beside Abigail and Ruby. That makes 10 times I've saved your life, Houndstooth. No more of this 9.5 nonsense, eh? Where's Betsy? Houndstooth asked her. Archie pointed to the small brown smudge on the other side of the water. Betsy had gotten herself out of the fray. Houndstooth blew an exasperated sigh. The hippo would have to be retrieved. As he watched, the smudge made its way back onto the bank across the water from the sentry tower. Archie, he said slowly, I think she's got the right idea getting onto land. As he spoke, a small bull with gleaming tusks, just a few meters in front of them, tore its into its neighbor, then cast its head round, hungry for a fight. You are both right, Archie replied. We have to get to high land. The bull seemed to hear her voice. With incredible speed, it detached itself from the frenzy of fighting roaring hippos and turned on them. Houndstooth felt at his pocket. The only knife he had left was his ivory-handled switchblade. Archie's hammer hung at her waist, useless in the melee. They looked at each other, exhausted, out of options. But then, in a final miraculous rescue, 4 bobbing shapes slapped into the furious bull and toppled it. The buoys. Archie and Houndstooth stared at the buoys as they bobbed by, knocking the feral bull under the water each time he attempted to surface. Archie turned to Houndstooth. Thought they all blew. I thought Travers moved them all to the dam. Houndstooth gaped. Oh my God, Archie. No, he found 16 of them. A smile spread across his face. Hero made 20. Always have a backup plan. I told them we didn't need a backup plan, but they knew better. And they made 20, and they put 4 of them on a separate frequency, so they wouldn't go off right away. He was a little out of breath from pain and the explanation. They made 20, and those are the last 4. Archie let out a whoop. 20! God damn it, 20! She laughed, full-throated and gleeful. Come on, Houndstooth. All the ferals are still fighting each other. If you ever want to thank Hero in person, we'll have to follow our Betsy and get out of this mess. Together with Abigail tucked between them, Archie and Winslow struggled across the narrow and feral-infested passage. They dodged teeth and pushed past battling pairs of gray, bloodied hippos. Pressing forward, always forward, they finally scrambled onto the land outside the gate. Inland? Archie shouted over the rushing water and bellowing ferals. No! Houndstooth yelled back, wheeling Ruby back around by her harness and pointing to where Betsy was waiting for them. Upstream! They rowed alongside the water, watching more and more ferals swept past, carried by the current. They rowed until they weren't deafened by the ferals fighting anymore. Archie immediately dismounted and helped Houndstooth to slide off of Ruby. He sat on the ground, his hand pressed to his still bleeding side. Houndstooth, you're so pale. How much blood have you lost? Archie said, Never mind that now. I'll be fine. Where's... He gasped as a fresh wave of pain overtook him. Where's Abigail? Archie looked around. Betsy stood a ways off, farther inland, panting. There were a few new cuts marring her flank. Fresh battle scars to join the old ones. Houndstooth, I don't know. She was right there between us. I don't know how she could have slipped away. She scanned the water, but it was a froth of feral hippos. And she knew there was no use. But then, there she was. Abigail, surging her way up the current toward them. She scrabbled up the slope toward them, then slipped. Archie grabbed her harness and gave it a mighty heave. Between the two of them, Abigail made it up into the bank. Ruby nosed at her, and the two hippos wandered toward Betsy, who sprawled, exhausted, on the ground. Archie gave Rosa a nudge. Go on, she said. The hippo snorted her, unmoving. Archie rubbed her bristly nose and murmured to her, You have done so well, my Rosa. Go on, go and rest. You've earned it. Rosa lumbered off to join the other three hippos, where they lay in the shade, exhausted from battle. Archie settled herself next to Houndstooth on the muddy riverbank. Well, we are trapped, mon ami, she said. We cannot get overland with the ladies over there. The gate extends far too inland for Rosa and Abigail to cover the distance, and I think Ruby might not be in good enough shape right now for the journey anyways. We can't take them through the ruins of the dam, not safely, and we are not certainly going to take them into that, she said, gesturing to the whirling mass of furious pharaohs. So, what do we do now? Smoke a cigar, call it quits? Houndstooth was still out of breath, face very pale, but when Archie eased his shirt away from his side, she saw that he had nearly stopped bleeding. He gave a little laugh and considered her. Hero was too smart for me, you know. They had so many plans, so many contingencies, just in case, they kept saying, and I kept asking, in case of what? Archie watched Houndstooth, frowning. Are you alright, friend? You seem... I'm fine, he said, waving her off. I'm telling you what we're going to do next. He patted at his vest and reached inside to an inside pocket. He pulled out a little leather pouch sealed with wax, and then he handed her his ivory-handled knife. Miracle I managed to hang on to both of these after that fall, but then it's a bit of a day for miracles. Be 11 open this, won't you? My hands are too steady. Archie slid open the wax and tipped the contents of the pouch into Houndstooth's waiting hand. Just in case, they said. Just in case. He held up the little black detonator. Just in case the charges don't blow, let's have a backup, they said. Just a few buoys that can start the chain. In case things go wrong. But of course, the first round of bombs worked perfectly. He laughed thinly. Archie looked up from the detonator to the gate, to the swarm of pharaohs that frothed against the Sturgis Queen, pressing the buoys right up against the riverboat. She looked up at the tower, where Travers leaned against the railing, watching the chaos below, still laughing with his hand pressed to his mangled face. 4 buoys left undetonated, he said with a weak smile. How many sticks of dynamite is that equivalent to? Archie grinned. I have no idea, Houndstooth. Let's find out. Archie put his hand over his. They pressed a button together and sat back side by side as the 4 backup buoys exploded in a glorious display of fire and fury. A few moments later, the flames from the buoys had reached the half saddlebag of Madre del Diablo that had been left unused. The Sturgis Queen cracked open in a thunderous explosion of fire and splinters. Archie and Houndstooth toppled over under the force of the shockwave. The gate blew back in a gust of shrapnel. The blast sent feral hippos flying. Several of them bowled into the ranger's tower. The tower gave a mighty groan, which creaked and tipped and fell. Archie and Houndstooth watched as Travers, tiny at such a distance, clung to the railing of the sentry post for a long moment before dropping into the water. They watched as the pharaohs that had survived the explosion were covering, but shaken, swarming him. They were too far distant to hear his screams, but they could see his body flying through the air as the furious feral hippos tossed him between each other. I told you, Houndstooth said. I told you he would suffer. That you did, Archie replied. They couldn't hear his screams over the sounds of the pharaohs, but it was enough for both of them to simply watch as the pharaohs destroyed him in the water next to the wreckage of the Harriet Gate. Well, Houndstooth, I would say this caper was a raging success, no? Archie asked. It wasn't a caper. Houndstooth mumbled, just before he blacked out. Archie patted his chest as he lay on the ground beside her. I know, she murmured. It was an operation. She sat next to him as the water calmed. When he woke, she knew what he would want to go after. Adelia. He would want to beat Grand Carter to her. He would want to go find Hero, and together with them, he would want to see justice served. But for now, and just for a few hours, she decided to let him rest. He would need it. The sun rose higher in the sky overhead, and the day grew hot. Houndstooth and the hippo slept, and Archie watched as the pharaohs, unconstrained by dam or gate or raging current, take the Mississippi. Now for the epilogue. Oh, well, look who it is. Hi there. V in a nutshell. I'm reading from River of Teeth by Sarah Gailey. I have parts 1 and 2 up if you ever need something like help you get to sleep, because it's not a boring book, but it doesn't really help unless you got it really in front of you. If you're interested in purchasing it, it's like $4 on Amazon, $12 for like a physical copy. Not sure if your local Barnes & Noble at the Rio will have it, but it's a pretty solid book. We have good representation. We got a little bit of noir. We got violence. We got romance. We got found family. Shit's pretty fucking good. And I will be finished very soon, so I can possibly rustle up a late supper and finish my dishes before going to bed myself. Let's finish strong, folks. Thanks for listening. Grand Carter rode up to the dock of a little clapboard house a mile outside the Harriet Gate astride a borrowed Arnesian brown hippo named Pauline. Hero was in front of him, tied at the waist to keep them upright. He dismounted and hauled Hero up the back door to the house. Leaving Pauline beside the other hippos at the gated dock. Carter's nostrils flared. He smelled the air and shook his head. By some miracle, Hero was not putting out the familiar septic battlefield stench of a gut wound. There was only the clean, hot smell of blood in the air. 10 pages left. A miracle. Or was it? Carter rapped on the door hard and waited for the doctor to answer, hoping he'd be at home. While he waited, Carter reflected on the facts. Fact number 1. Adelia Reyes was, without question, the deadliest, most ruthless contract killer of the day, possibly of all time. Fact number 2. Adelia Reyes had hit Hero with 2 knives. The first had been aimed at Hero's heart, but had struck their sternum just softly enough to lodge there. Fact number 3. The second knife had been aimed at Hero's gut, but had managed to avoid nicking their bowel, their liver, their gallbladder. Carter touched Hero's forehead slightly. It was only slightly warm. Feverish, sure, but not frightening. Infection had not begun to set in yet. It didn't add up. Either Adelia was losing her touch, which was impossible, or she had let Hero live on purpose, even more impossible. Before he could try to resolve the matter, the door swung open. A tall, dark-haired man stood in the doorway, wiping blood from his bare hands. "What's this?" he asked, looking at Hero's limp form. "What's happened here?" "Stabbed. Twice. Gut and chest." Carter watched the doctor's face begin to set into a practiced, bad news expression and hurried on. "But the woman who stabbed them, miss. They missed everything, Doc. Please, can you help them?" The doctor leaned inside and called for help. A young white woman, stout and muscle-bound, appeared in the doorway to help Hero inside. "One more thing, doctor, please." Pulled out a photo out of his pocket. "Have you seen this woman? She may have come through here with minor wounds from a feral fight." The doctor smiled broadly, revealing carved ivory teeth, straight and white and shining. He did not look at the photo. Carter sighed and pulled a small bag out of the same pocket, handing it to the doctor. The doctor weighed it in his hand before looking at the photo. "No, can't say I've ever seen her. I'd remember that tattoo, I reckon." Grant tucked the photo away. "Worth a try. I best be going. But your patient will have people coming along for them shortly." He tipped his hat and sprinted back down the dock to Pauline. The doctor watched Grant go and eased inside, shutting the door behind him and turning the deadbolt. He rested his back against the door for a moment. His eyes closed. When he opened them, she was standing there waiting for him. Her eyes glittered in the half-dark of the room. You'd best tend to your patient, Doctor, Adelia Reyes said with a small smile. It's, it's as Agent Carter says. They'll have people coming along shortly. That, my friends, is one hell of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Cliffhanger. And again, like I said in the beginning of this stream, the sequel to this book, Taste of Marrow, is available via Tor. What's the freaking distributor of this thing? I don't I don't have it. Tor Publishing. That's the name I'm looking for. When you buy this, oh shit. That's so kind. Thank you. You should be getting to bed very soon. I'm very glad I got a chance to read this. I don't know if I'll be reading the second one, but who knows? I just might. This is good practice. Thanks so much to all who will listen to this. Keep reading great books. Buy books. Support your local libraries. Drink water. Put on your mask. Fuck white supremacy. All that good shit. I have to go do the dishes. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in.